When we're confronted with adversity, it can motivate us to strive harder to overcome our situation. Other times, our loved ones are the ones faced with life obstacles, and in those scenarios, our drive to relieve the suffering of the ones we love can be even greater than the forces that enable us to help ourselves. Boomer Esiason is a retired American football quarterback and current network commentator. When his son Gunnar at age 2 was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, he was motivated to form the Boomer Esiason Foundation. So you're in the height of your career, you got a gorgeous son, Gunnar, 2 years old, and you get that phone call. What do you feel?
Yeah, it was debilitating, as any parent can probably tell you, that you just want answers. And for 2 years, we couldn't get answers as to what was wrong with Gunnar. We knew there was something wrong. He was misdiagnosed at the age of 1. So now I get traded to the New York Jets. I'm on the practice field for the first time in a New York Jet uniform. And before I can even take a snap of the football, I'm being told that my son has been rushed to a hospital in Cincinnati and that I have to return home to find out what the problem is. And when I got there, my wife and I were sitting in this kind of waiting room. And as soon as I saw a cystic fibrosis nurse, I knew what the situation was. So,
did you know what cystic fibrosis was? Because there's only 30,000 people in America, so most people don't know anything about it.
Well, oddly enough, there's a little destiny and irony associated with this story. I received an award in the early part of 1989 as the quarterback of the year, if you will. And at that dinner that night, Frank DeFord, who at that time was the chairman of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, was the featured speaker. I had no idea that he was going to be there. So he spoke, and I was inspired by his speech. He had lost his daughter, Alex, to the disease of cystic fibrosis, which I had never heard of until that night. I heard this and I said, Frank, how can I get involved? And he said, if you go back to Cincinnati and become the face of cystic fibrosis fundraising, that would be huge for us and our foundation nationally. And I said, I'd love to.
And that's when you set up the Boomer Esiason Foundation? No?
No, Gunnar had not even been born, and then Gunnar comes along in April of '91. And I get traded to the New York Jets, which in this case was a blessing. We were able to put a face on a disease, and we exploited the fact that I was an NFL quarterback.
It must have been hard as parents, you and Cheryl, coping on a day-to-day life, having now studied all the background of cystic fibrosis. I mean, what kind of symptoms was he having as a young child? And how did you always make sure if you went to school someone knew how to react? And I can't even imagine.
No, you can. And as a parent, you have to educate yourself. And it's one of the things that we tell all parents is really, really important, and it's paramount. So for me, the working father, going to football games and practices, I was able to leave the house for the stay-at-home mom, who basically was the everyday caregiver. That's a little bit different level of stress and anxiety that you have to deal with. And one of the reasons that Gunnar is as healthy as he is today is because of the dedication of his mom. There's no question about it, yes. Cheryl has put her life behind him and has basically done everything that you would expect a mom to do in her situation.
We're going to hold it by the nose and kick it in the pants.
And I think Gunnar would probably be the first to tell you it's the reason why he's here today and why he is as healthy as he is.
Did you ever get a phone call from Cheryl that it was just too much for her to cope? Because as a caregiver, that's kind of the hardest job.
In all the years that she's been around Gunnar, I've never heard one complaint.
But I mean, just not even a panic moment, nothing. I mean, that's amazing.
No, I mean, there's a first time for everything.
Yeah.
So the first time Gunnar has to go to the hospital, get a PICC line put in his arm for antibiotic intravenous therapy, that's a bridge that you have to cross, and you got to cross it together. The first time that he had to go in for a bronchoscopy in which they had to clear his lungs out of the mucus that was building up, that's a bridge you have to get over. So there are all those things that you have to deal with.
A lot of parents would have been really afraid knowing that cystic fibrosis affects the lungs. And you got him into sport. You got him on the pitch. You got him on the ice hockey. Did you have any fears while you were doing it at the same time that you knew you needed to give him the most normal upbringing possible, but at the same time, they're very active sports?
30 years ago, playing sports for a cystic fibrosis person wouldn't even be thought of as the right way of handling a disease such as CF. And then along came, the idea that exercise was a good thing, and that our thought process at the beginning, I'll never forget, was he's got to get out there and he's got to be a normal human being. He's got to have sleepovers, he's got to go on field trips, he's got to go to class, be a part of a team. Because I believe in my own life, if I didn't have that, I don't necessarily know that I would be as successful.
And he became pretty good at sport.
He was really, he was inspirational for everybody who ever played with him, his teammates, his coaches, other parents that would come and watch him play. And he certainly carried his own weight. I'll never forget the first time he comes home and he says, "Dad, I told Mom I want to play football, and she said that I have to ask you if I can play." And I said, "Well, you know how I feel, Gunnar, but really it's up to your mom." And then he went back to his mom and said, "Dad said I could play."
Brilliant.
So he ended up playing football, which much to the chagrin, I think, initially of Cheryl.
And how did his fellow athletes react around him if any of his symptoms just suddenly came on?
The interesting thing about Gunnar, so in cystic fibrosis, when you have an exacerbation within the lungs, they'll put you on intravenous antibiotics, and that usually is a 21 to 28 day therapy, and you receive intravenous antibiotics 4 times a day. So Gunnar would go to practice with his antibiotic balls in his pocket, and he'd be running around out there with his teammates, and his teammates wouldn't even know.
Wow.
Then. But there was also, when they did find out, respect for the dedication that he showed to be there with his teammates.
I want to come back and talk about drug development in a minute, but we're just going to take a quick break. We'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. I'm here with Boomer and Gunnar Esiason. Gunnar's just joined us. Gunnar, I have to say I really, really enjoy your vlog.
Oh, thanks for reading, watching. We started the blog probably about 5 years ago now, and it's been one of our greatest educational tools at the Boomer Esiason Foundation.
I think you're going to take your dad's job soon.
I guess that's the idea. That's what he wants, at least.
He can have it, actually. To be honest with you, I'm ready to retire.
Well, you're really a natural, I have to say. We're just talking to your dad about how he felt when he first heard you'd been diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, because that's why we're here. I want to raise awareness and motivate and inspire people that life goes on and we don't need to focus on it all the time. But for those people that don't know what cystic fibrosis is, how would you sum it up if you were describing it?
So cystic fibrosis is pretty complex, but the simple definition, at least, is a genetic disease that impacts mostly the respiratory system as well as the digestive tract, but really has an impact on the entire body.
And when your dad and you were first getting into sport together, do you feel that his support helped you massively, and your mum, Cheryl? When did you kind of realize I have something that's different to other kids?
I think I realized pretty early on that I was different from everyone else. You know, I spent hours a day doing my treatments, inhalers, medications. When I was younger, my parents used to, you know, pat my chest, pound on my chest to clear the mucus from my lungs, so I could cough it out. My lungs obviously don't filter the mucus properly, so that's where the inherent issue is. And my parents really empowered me to be a normal kid and live a normal childhood. Looking back on it, I know that's why I'm still here today.
That's great. When you were growing up, do you feel that drug development has come in leaps and bounds?
Yeah, I think right now we're living in the boom of drug development within cystic fibrosis. We've seen a number of drugs come from the test tube to the patient. And really, since I was born, we've had maybe half a dozen new drugs come to the patient.
What was amazing, when he was diagnosed, Dr. Wilmot, Bob Wilmot from Cincinnati Children's Hospital, told me, "Man, you cannot believe what's on the horizon." And I do know from talking to older CF patients, older than he is, that they've been waiting for all these things to come finally from the test tube to the patient. And he certainly has benefited. And we, you know, have invested millions, along with the National Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, in coming up with all these new drugs, which also creates other inherent problems, which are who is paying for them, how expensive they are, the research and development that goes into it, the liability that comes along with it. So there's a lot of that stuff that goes into it that nobody sees. But all I can tell you, the drugs that have been formulated have really had a significant impact in the world and on the lives of all CF patients.
It must be expensive to have
Yeah, you know, realistically,
the need for these
there
drugs.
There's a huge cost that comes along with these drugs for every single family that has cystic fibrosis. And it seems like every time an administration changes, we sort of hang on and see what comes out.
Well, what you got to do is you got to be responsible. You
Yeah.
have to try to be as responsible as you can, first and foremost as parents, to take care of your children. But secondly, as an advocate for cystic fibrosis patients, both of us and our entire foundation is fighting on behalf of the people that have no voice.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that the most vulnerable amongst us, whether it be CF patients, Down syndrome patients, autism patients, cerebral palsy patients, these are the most vulnerable. Those are the people that we, I believe, have to take care of, and we have a responsibility to do that. So in our foundation, we try to do that. We stay in our lane. We stay with our cystic fibrosis people that we're trying to help on a daily basis, whether it be through lung transplant grants, whether it be through scholarships, over $5 million in scholarships given away, or drug development.
Well, on your fantastic Making It Matters vlog, you've given out so much information that inspired me, and I'm not, suffering with CF. I've got legs missing and body parts missing and, all sorts of things that I could relate to, but not on that scale. But what I found fascinating was your co-vlogger, Julia Ray, actually said that you guys have never met. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so people that have cystic fibrosis are at risk when we meet other people with CF because of the bacteria that's harbored within our lungs. And we're essentially contagious to each other. We've never actually met, yet we've done 30 episodes of the podcast together. What I have found in talking to people with cystic fibrosis through the foundation and things like that is as soon as you meet someone that has CF, you have a connection that just is unlike anything else in the world. It's like you've known that person for 15 years because you've all gone through the daily regimen that is cystic fibrosis, whether it be the hours doing treatments every day, it's the hospital visits, the intravenous antibiotics, the feeding tubes. We all have something in common, regardless of how severe our case of cystic fibrosis may be. Every single one of us can relate, whether it be the cough, the treatments, whatever.
It's just a real bummer that you can't date each other because while you're coughing up some blood or a bit of mucus on a date, you're going, yeah, you go to the bathroom first.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julie and I probably get along so well because we've both gone through a lot of these things individually.
It's the same with me. If someone's lost a leg, we sit talking about, you got that new leg? Have you got
But you don't
the
have
thing?
to worry about cross-contamination.
Yes.
That's what they have to worry about.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
No.
And there are different strains of the bacteria that, that really can be extremely bad for these kids. You try to be smart about it, keep them separate. And if he is in a room with other CF patients, he's got to know where they are, who they are, and the same should be said for them
Is
as
that
well.
because of a gene mutation and
So
you've all got...
basically what happens is since we have the mucus in our lungs,
Yeah.
we basically will breathe in bacteria from the outside air.
Yeah.
And the bacteria, whereas all of us have it, our body can fight it off. Normally people with cystic fibrosis can't do that. So we'll be colonized with some of the world's most deadly bacteria, or sort of the things that you hear on the news. And we take antibiotics pretty much every single day.
Do you not become resistant eventually to the antibiotics?
That's exactly what happens. So over time, you run out of options. So obviously you have to be responsible when you're taking care of yourself with antibiotics, with treatments, and ultimately seeing other people, because you can't, for example, if someone has cystic fibrosis in this room, I have no idea how that person is taking care of him or herself, and that person has no idea how well I take care of myself. So
Or in
risk to
Julia's
each other.
situation, her brother's got cystic fibrosis.
Exactly.
So how do they deal with that?
So there's also family members, since it's a genetic disease, that can have cystic fibrosis. For them, it's a little bit unique because a lot of the time they grow up together and they'll be exposed to a lot of the similar things. But when one of them is sick, the other's got to stay away. Say if one of them has a hospital visit or something like that, it's very isolating because they can't be there for each other in those times of need.
Right, and the colonized bacteria could be different in one CF patient compared to another. So there could be a Cepacia patient, there could be a Pseudomonas patient, and you just don't want to be cross-contaminating.
No.
And and it's really what it is. It's just a way to be really careful. It's common sense.
We should, but in situations like the couple that you talked about, Dalton and what was the? Was it Ray and Dalton? Kate and Dalton. Kate and Dalton, and that's a really important message to get out there because that was quite tragic that they actually couldn't resist each other and met.
Yeah, so I think what we've seen now that with the advent of social media and forums and communities where people with cystic fibrosis can meet and talk to each other, it's created a situation where people support each other in times of need through Skype or the internet or whatever.
And fall in love.
Exactly, and also because people have such a strong connection, they
Yeah.
obviously have a lot in common and they can ultimately fall in love. And while they made a choice and it's their choice, I personally would be careful about it.
Well, it just shouldn't happen, but unfortunately, love is a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yes,
And
I mean,
otherwise
that's-
we'd have complete fidelity and everything else in life if actually you could control those feelings. But you know, I'm being very open with you because I've listened to your vlogs, so sorry if I sound like I know you too well, but
That's what they're there for.
it's just brilliant. Dating, tell us about dating. You can't date a cystic fibrosis colleague, so to speak, but when you go out on a date and you suddenly have some symptoms, a bad day, how do you explain that to your date, or when do you bring it up? Do you
So
say, hey, I'm a CF, or do you sort of wait until you've got mucus all over the place?
So,
Have you got any funny stories? Because I've got a lot
Yeah,
of
so
funny
you know,
stories.
there are definitely, it's definitely a hurdle that people with cystic fibrosis have to face when finding a date or a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever.
Because you're a really good-looking guy, so I'm
thank
sure
you.
you get
I
asked
try
that
my
all
best.
the time.
No, I actually have a girlfriend.
Don't worry, I'm not chatting you up.
And no, there are subtle hints that I give that are, I think, that I definitely recognize what's going on because I take pills every time I have to eat something to help myself digest. Or I'm taking
I take
antibiotics.
enzymes all the time, but I'm
Yes.
always paranoid that people think I'm on some secret drug, so I'm always taking them like that with my water, but you just get them out.
Yeah, so I just pull them right out, and then, of course, the question comes. And
Are you a drug addict? Yeah.
well, or what are those for?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the person that whether it be a friend or a girlfriend, that person has to accept CF if I want them to be in my life. If the person's not going to help empower me or support me in my times of need, then that person doesn't need to be around me.
But how do you know that when you first date someone? It's just a normal course
It's
of...
just it's like a job interview, right? You
Yeah.
have to sort of talk to somebody and get to know them, and just
Can't
like
you
the-
just get them around quickly and see some extreme bad day and then see how they handle it? And
Yeah,
then they're
like a-
out the
like
door,
an
so you
emergency
just quick in.
situation. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, because they're like my friends in college, for example, my roommates in college, they had to learn how to become first responders if something
Yeah.
ever happened. And something did, a few things did happen in college where I had to get right down to the emergency room. And I have a feeding tube, and one day it fell out. And I walked up to my roommate and I said, "Hey, I've got a hole in my stomach." And while he may have passed out in the moment, he finally came to and was like, "Okay, well, now we have to go to the hospital."
But the one thing as a parent, I'll never forget this. When Gunnar was first diagnosed, everything was wide open. If you came over to play with Gunnar as a buddy, you saw him doing his treatments. So it started at an early age. So
Yeah.
he would have kids coming over from kindergarten, and they wouldn't be shocked, to see that he is doing something a little bit differently, and they had to wait for him to go through his treatments, and then they would sit there, and then as he grew older, all these kids grew older with him, and all of them basically accepted him for who he was because they didn't know any different. So that was a conscious decision that Cheryl and I made, that we were not going to hide this, that this was going to be
Which is
normal every single day way of life, and his friends would learn it.
In a way, they socialized it, right? So
Yeah.
they made my treatment time, because I have to do it twice a day, once when I wake up and when I go to bed. And it's very active. I'm doing nebulizers. I'm attaching myself to a vest to shake myself so the mucus can come out. And they basically socialized it to the extent where my friends were around me while I was doing it, so that when I got to college and I was on my own, I could basically explain to them what was going on.
Ignorance breeds fear, and I find that humor helps a lot. Do you bring a lot of humor into your life to
Yeah.
deal with crazy situations?
If I can laugh at myself and I can laugh at what I'm dealing with, which is a terminal disease, then it shows other people around me that, okay, I've gotten over it, and you don't have to, it's not the one thing that defines me. And I'm also a person aside from cystic fibrosis. I'm a person that has
Have you
cystic
got one
fibrosis.
funny story, like a dating story?
One story that I tell is right when I got my feeding tube placed, I came out of it was a surgery, a minor surgery, and I came out of the anesthesia, and I asked the nurse attending, "Can I funnel a beer through my feeding tube?" And the nurse said, "Honey, you're not the first to ask," and walked out. So lo and behold, a few months later, we were in college. Obviously, I was a college student, and it was one of those days up at Boston College where it was just totally cold and couldn't go anywhere. And I funneled the beer right through my stomach in front of a crowd of about 10 people. It was a great conversation starter. But it's not something that I would ever recommend for someone that has a feeding tube.
Yeah,
I
don't know
won't
about that.
I won't promote that at home. Give us a moment. We're going to take a break, and I'm talking with Boomer and Gunnar Esiason. Come back soon. I'm Heather Mills, and we're talking overcoming adversity with Boomer and Gunnar Esiason, and we're also talking dating with cystic fibrosis. We talked before that you go on a date, and the way that you show is to get your pills out and What does the girl do? Does she freak out and think, what are you doing? Or
I think I've had a few experiences with just about everything. You know, I think I've seen the girl freak out. I've also been on dates where the girl has sort of asked right up front, you know, what is that? What are you dealing with? And then I say I have cystic fibrosis. I try to keep it as simple as possible because I don't want to scare her away. But I have to be truthful because ultimately that person's got to understand that it's a difficult life, and if she's going to be a part of my life, then she's going to have to, I guess, take some of the burden, or, you know, understand that I could have down days, which there are plenty of.
when do you work out if she's going to be your quarterback or if she's just going to be sitting on the sidelines and you get rid of her?
I think, you know, usually a couple of dates I can tell pretty well if the person is going to be able to handle it.
Do you take digestive enzymes?
Yeah, I do take digestive enzymes every time I have to eat because my pancreas doesn't function properly.
People that don't know, because I take them as well, it helps break it down in your body to take the nutritions.
So basically it does the job of what your other organs would normally do, but it just does it in your stomach, and it does it artificially. So as you can see, I'm a pretty lean person. I have a hard time putting weight on. Actually, in 2010, I was diagnosed with pancreatitis, which can happen to people with cystic fibrosis, and I dropped all the way to 138 pounds. And I'm 6'2", so that was a pretty significant issue. And the decision was made that I need to go into a feeding tube. So after I finished college that semester, they decided to put the feeding tube in right away. Climbed all the way to 170 pounds. You know, I try to get in at about 5,000 calories in a day, which is insane.
I used to have to do 4,000 when I was ski racing, and it's a nightmare.
It's hard.
You know,
And especially with digestive issues.
I got to tell you about this feeding tube whole thing. You know,
Yeah.
I was an advocate for the feeding tube when he was 16 years old. And I was told by him, I'm not doing that, Dad. I'm not doing that, Dad, because dads don't know what they're doing, right?
That's
Dads
right.
have no idea what
Absolutely
they're doing.
not.
And then he went away to college and then came home really sick. And he goes, I want to do the feeding tube. And I'm like, yeah, you know, sooner or later they come around to the right way of thinking. You know, and the feeding tube for him, to me, I saw a whole new person. Because as you know, as I know, and everybody out there who's watching knows, he has got to stay healthy. He's got to fight, you know, he's got to support his immune system. He's got to fight the bacterial infections every single day. That's why he does his treatments. And that's why for a cystic fibrosis patient, especially like Gunnar, who was not thriving, you know, through nutrition, he needed as much help as he could get, and that feeding tube was really quite the boost.
So do you feed tube and you still go out for dinner and eat, and so you
exactly.
double it up?
So so what he was touching on was the stigma that's attached to the feeding tube. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people with cystic fibrosis, when they hear feeding tube, it scares them because it immediately puts them into, they think at least, they're bringing themselves into a different category. And I was definitely afraid of it. And then as soon as I got the feeding tube placed, it actually became the easiest part of my routine. You know, everything else I have to do has got to be sterile. It's got to be very careful. It's got to be I can handle with care. The feeding tube is just like another mouth, so I can put whatever I want through it.
So you just
So
you
I-
recommend it to everybody?
Well, no, you know, not everyone with cystic fibrosis has a compromised pancreas. Most of us do, and those people.
Tell
who,
us the different parts that can be affected by CF, so people understand that someone can have 5 or 6 things, some can have 1.
Basically, cystic fibrosis can impact your respiratory system, meaning your lungs. It can impact your sinuses. You can get bacteria in your sinuses. I don't have to deal with that, or haven't had to yet.
Julia
knock on
Ray,
wood.
your
Julia Ray does.
colleague, yeah, she has to have operations and
Yeah,
stuff.
so she they call them the sinus surgeries.
Okay.
And then the digestive tract is the other main part, but it really impacts every single organ. You know, in men it impacts the fertility. It impacts fertility in women in some cases. You know, so it's really an all-encompassing disease. You know, and we also will develop osteoporosis as we get older. I mean,
Potential for diabetes.
Yes, exactly.
Pancreatitis.
Yeah, I mean, there's
also ulcers. There's all sorts of things that could arise from all
So
of
the
this.
key thing is you've got to really, really take care of yourself.
Exactly.
And that's the key thing. And we were talking before about when things get really bad, some people need to have transplants and how important that is that they take care of themselves. You've come up with a new...
Well, there's a number of things that we've done. First and foremost, we have actually formed a partnership with organ donation here in New York State. And every time I run into somebody who has gotten a new set of lungs because somebody who died tried to give the most unselfish gift of all, and that is to leave life behind, I say you earn those lungs because somebody gave them to you and they're giving you a second chance. So don't take this for granted. And most CF patients that go through this operation are ones that are committed to taking care of themselves moving forward. But we also developed something at New York Presbyterian where we want to try to cultivate lungs outside of the body longer than they last. Wow. And this is like, looking into the future, 10, 20 years, because we're not there yet, but you have to start somewhere. So we've invested a few $1 million to create a program at New York Presbyterian, organ donation, lung donation in particular, to help cultivate these lungs. And if we do have compromised lungs, that we can maybe fix those lungs and put them into the body. But again, this is a science that is just beginning, and it's something that we felt very strong about, and making sure that we got this thing under wraps, because that's the last part of maybe what Gunner's life will be someday. We hope that's not the case. We believe that Gunner takes care of himself. But to watch these families go through the uncertainty of that is really, really difficult.
What about when you have a baby? Now, anyone watching this that's just got a newborn baby, I was a paranoid mum, like, oh my God, did you cough when you were a first-time mum? What are the signs, and is there any test that can be done so that people can eliminate, they're not going to,
well, the thing now is you
this?
could do prenatal testing, and you could know, and you can also do genetic testing like you would for Tay-Sachs. You could still test for CF. Most CF people look like me, blonde hair and blue eyes, but we're seeing that now a cross-section of people are developing cystic fibrosis through genetics. So you could always do the smart thing, I think, if you're ready to have a child and you want to really plan it out, you can do pre-testing, prenatal testing. You can also find out, once you are pregnant, whether or not your baby may be born with cystic fibrosis. And if that's the case, you still have the child, because look what you got here.
Exactly.
You have the most beautiful person in the world who becomes the biggest inspiration in your life. And it's, my life is better because of Gunner. I know that he deals with this every day, but anybody who comes in contact with somebody like him who has to deal with what he's dealing with, you become a better person.
So he's an inspiration on a daily basis for you?
100%. Anytime I feel sorry for myself,
yeah.
All I have to do is think about what he's dealing with and the way that he carries himself. I don't want to embarrass him, but you would think that somebody in the world of sport, like I grew up, if I could ever see him wearing a football uniform and winning the Super Bowl, that would be the ultimate. The Archie Manning of the world, watching two sons, Peyton Manning and Eli Manning, winning the Super Bowl, must be unbelievably proud about their accomplishments. Well, that's one thing. I see my son winning the Super Bowl every single day, and I watch how he carries himself.
It's minuscule in comparison, not to be rude. I mean,
it is, but it's not on a platform as the Super Bowl will be. But the way he carries himself, the messages that he puts out, I know as a parent, I couldn't ask for anything more, because he was born into something that he really had no say in. And then as he grew older, it's a burden that he has to deal with. And,
but he's
watching
changing lives on a daily basis, and that's why I was inspired by your Making It Matter vlogs, because I listen to them, and I think everybody should go on your vlog, CF or not, because it relates to so many areas of anybody, of any illness you've got. It's really fantastic, and I love seeing the relationship between the two of you. It's been a real, real pleasure. I just want to say thanks so much for being my guests on today's show, Overcoming Adversity with Heather Mills. I've very much been inspired, and I hope you have at home. I'll be back after the break. I want to thank you for joining me and my guests today. And remember, find your cause, find the reason why you're here in life, focus on it, and try and make a difference. Join me in the rest of Season 1 with future guests Richard Branson, Simon Cowell, Sharon Stone, Julia Roberts, Charlize Theron, and more. Until next time, take care.